The sun rose over Dry Creek like a furnace lid lifting on hell. No breeze, no birdsong, just heat and silence, wrapped around the bones of a dying land. Clay Morgan stood on his porch, one boot braced against the rail, a tin mug of coffee cradled in his calloused hands. The drink had gone cold long before the sun reached the top of the hills, but he held it anyway, a kind of habit, like watching the dust drift over the fields where cattle no longer grazed. The ranch stretched for miles, or at least it used to. These days, it barely made it past the barbed wire that sagged like old shoulders. The grass was brittle, yellow as cornmeal, and every hoofprint was a scar in the cracked dirt. 2 years of drought had left the water troughs bone dry and the cattle thin enough to see daylight through. He'd sold half the herd last fall, what was left of them, and buried the rest himself when winter proved colder than any of them could survive. The old windmill creaked on its rusting spine. Once, that sound had meant water. Hope, now it was just another ghost rattling its chains. Clay drained what was left in his cup, tossed the grounds into the dirt, and stepped off the porch. He didn't look back at the house. He didn't need to. It was a shell, peeling paint, a chimney that coughed smoke even when there was no fire, and windows that stayed shut because hope, like dust, crept in too easily. He hitched up the mule cart just after sunup. The truck hadn't run since February, and even if it had, there wasn't gas to feed it. The mule, at least, was dependable. Slow, stubborn, but steady. In the back of the cart were 3 rusted tools, a coil of copper wire, a busted saddle, and a crate of bent horseshoes. Junk, really. But town had a pawnbroker, and Clay had debts. The kind that didn't wait for rain. As the cart rolled down the dirt path toward town, Clay's mind wandered, not to dreams, not anymore, but to memory. His father's voice, hard as hickory, rang in his skull. "Land don't love you back, boy. You work it, you feed it, but don't expect it to thank you." He'd ignored that truth for too long. Thought grit and work were enough. But grit didn't stop the sun from baking the fields to ash, and work couldn't stop banks from calling in their favors. By midday, he reached the edge of Garrison Hollow, a town more spit than shine. A strip of wooden buildings clung to the edge of the road like ticks on a hound's ear. Saloon, livery, general store, sheriff's office. And, of course, the auction block. That was new. Clay frowned as he pulled the mule to a stop. There was a crowd gathering. Mostly men, a few women, all with that hollow-eyed look of folks scraping the bottom of the barrel. On the makeshift platform stood a portly man in suspenders and a sweat-soaked shirt, shouting above the murmurs. "Next up, young, strong, stubborn as a bull, but she'll work if you make her. Labor girl, no kin, no baggage, just the raw deal." Clay set the brake, stepped down, and followed the noise. He hadn't come for entertainment, but curiosity. It crept in like rot. On the platform stood a girl, maybe 15, maybe 20. It was hard to tell beneath the dirt smeared across her cheeks and the tangle of auburn hair that fell in greasy ropes. She didn't look at the crowd, didn't cower. She stood barefoot, fists clenched, chin raised, eyes burning with something that looked a lot like fury. The auctioneer jabbed a thumb toward her. "Name's Junie Rollins. Some of you might remember her pa, Jed Rollins, worked cattle before he got himself shot in a poker brawl. This one's what he left behind. No home, no money, no manners. She has been turned out of every household she's worked for. Too wild, they said." The crowd snickered. A few men called out suggestions Clay didn't care to remember. Junie didn't blink. "She's strong," the auctioneer said. "Good with animals if you can get her to listen. Can cook, clean, if she don't bite first." That drew another round of laughter. Clay leaned on the hitch rail, studying her. There was something off about the girl. Not broken, not beaten, just loose, like a colt that hadn't yet decided if it wanted to run or trample you. "Starting at $15, the man bellowed. "Do I hear 15? Silence. 10? 10 for the wild girl? Nothing. "Come on, boys. It's cheaper than a field hand, and she eats less." Someone snorted. "That one eats pride and pisses vinegar." Junie grinned then, a crooked, mocking grin. Clay saw the glint in her eyes. She liked that, liked scaring them. "5? The auctioneer tried again. "Hell, I'll start the bidding at 3 just to clear the roster." Still nothing. Junie spat at the man's boots. The auctioneer flinched. $2, Clay said, before he could think better of it. Every head turned. Even Junie looked at him, first time she moved since she got up there. Her eyes narrowed, but not in anger. She was sizing him up. "Sold," the auctioneer cried. $2 to the fool with a hat. "Come collect your bargain, mister." Clay didn't move. For a long moment he stood there, hands in his pockets, wondering what in God's name he'd just done. Then he stepped forward. Junie jumped off the platform without waiting, landed like a cat, walked past him and toward his mule cart like she'd already decided the matter. "She yours now," the auctioneer said, wiping his brow. "Good luck." Clay said nothing. They walked side by side to the cart. Clay climbed up first. Junie slung herself into the back without a word, next to the busted saddle and scrap iron. The mule snorted. Clay snapped the reins. They left town in silence, dust curling behind the wheels like smoke. It wasn't until they reached the first bend in the trail, far from any curious ears, that Junie finally spoke. "You don't own me," she said, her voice flat. Clay didn't turn around. "Nope," he said, "just rented your time." That's what the last one said, before he tried to get clever with his hands. Clay spat into the dirt. "Try anything like that, and you'll bury me with your boots on. I ain't clever." Junie smirked. "We'll see." They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they reached the ranch, the sun was hanging low, bleeding gold across the scrub. Clay climbed down, unhitched the mule, and opened the gate. "This is it," he said. Junie looked around. "Looks like a corpse." Clay shrugged. "You're not wrong." He pointed toward the bunkhouse. "That's where you sleep. There's water in the pump. Barely. You work with the animals, help with fencing, keep out of my way otherwise." Junie nodded once. "I don't clean." Clay raised a brow. "Fine. Don't eat either." Her mouth twitched just a little. "I'll cook." "Better." She turned toward the bunkhouse, paused, then looked back. "You always buy people you don't want?" Clay looked out at the hills, at the withered fences and the wind-beaten pastures. "Only when I'm out of options," he said. She walked away, and the door creaked shut behind her. Clay stood in the twilight, alone again. Except now, he wasn't. And somehow that scared him more than the bank, more than the drought, more than the dying land. Because the girl wasn't broken. And something about her felt like the beginning of a storm. The bunkhouse door creaked open just past dawn, but Junie was already up. Had been for hours. Sleep was a stranger she didn't chase, not here, not anywhere. She'd spent the night lying stiff on the thin cot, listening to the wind whisper under the cracked slats of wood, listening to the steady thrum of silence that didn't comfort, didn't cradle. This wasn't the kind of quiet people prayed for. It was the kind that pressed against your ribs and made you wonder if the world had stopped turning. She pulled on her boots without lacing them, slung her coat over one shoulder, and stepped out into the cold morning. The air bit like flint, dry and sharp, and the sky was already pale blue, the kind of color that promised a hard sun but no heat. She walked the path toward the shed, barefoot for the first stretch, letting the rocks chew at her soles. She didn't flinch. Pain, like quiet, was something she was used to by now. The ranch was still. A few birds cut across the sky, but no sounds came from the hills. No rustle of brush. No distant coyote song. Even the old windmill had fallen silent. its blades catching the wind like breath held too long. She paused at the fence line, rested one hand on the top rail, and looked out over the scrub. The land wasn't dead, not really. Just sleeping deep. Maybe dreaming of better hands. Clay was already in the corral, hunched over a fence post, tapping the wire back into place with slow, deliberate strikes. He didn't look up when she passed. She didn't greet him. They'd spoken all they needed to the day before. This wasn't friendship. This wasn't family. This was necessity. Survival wrapped in dust and distance. She headed for the barn without a word, swung open the door, and breathed in the scent of hay, mold, and old sweat. There were 3 horses. 2 old geldings that barely moved, and a spotted mare with a mean eye and a limp in her back leg. She moved toward the mare slowly, quiet as dusk, and stood just close enough to be noticed. "Morning," she whispered. The mare flinched, ears twitching. Junie didn't move. Just kept breathing soft and slow. After a long moment, she reached out with her palm down, fingers loose, like she was offering nothing at all. The mare sniffed, gave a short, suspicious snort, but didn't bolt. Behind her, Clay stood on the porch, chewing the same piece of jerky he'd been working for 20 minutes. He didn't speak, didn't shift, just watched. By mid-morning, Junie had the mare circling inside the pen with a rope she'd braided from old clothesline. Not fast, not graceful, but steady. The mare's limp faded as she moved, muscle warming, fear melting. Junie clicked her tongue and raised one hand. The mare stopped, breathing hard, eyes wide, but not running. Clay leaned against the post and spit the jerky out into the dirt. He didn't comment, didn't praise, just walked back to the barn like it didn't matter. But when he passed her on the way, he gave her a single nod. She didn't nod back. That night, she cooked over the fire pit, beans, old potatoes, a pinch of salt she'd found in the bottom of the tin. She didn't ask Clay to join her, but he came anyway, sat down on the edge of the porch like a man expecting nothing, received the tin plate without a word. They ate in silence. "You said you didn't cook," he muttered, chewing slow. "I said I don't clean." He made a noise, part grunt, part laugh. She didn't smile, but she refilled his plate. 2 days passed, then 4. She mended the barn hinge with wire and gum, pulled broken nails out of the fence with her bare hands, caught a rattlesnake under the coop and killed it so fast Clay didn't hear the strike, only the thunk of her shovel and the soft rattle of death afterward. She hung the skin by the door like a ward. Clay didn't thank her, but he left the coop gate unlocked the next day, like a gesture. One afternoon, she found a rusted horseshoe lodged beneath the porch stairs. She pulled it out, cleaned it with a rag, and hung it above the barn door. Clay saw it later, didn't say a word. She preferred it that way. But silence can't always hold. Sunday came dry and bright, the wind blowing from the south, hot and biting. Junie was filling water buckets by the trough when she felt it first. That shift in the air, that ripple that meant someone was coming. She looked up and saw the dust trail before the wagon. The wagon rolled in slow, pulled by 2 lean chestnut horses. On the seat sat a man in a broad hat, coat long and gray like ash. He climbed down before the wheels stopped, boots heavy, movements casual in the way of dangerous men. Clay came out from the barn, rag still in hand. "Elias," he said, not kindly. The man grinned. "Didn't expect to see you still breathing." Junie stayed by the trough, holding the bucket with both hands. "Didn't expect to see you this far north," Clay said. "Curiosity. Town's talking." Elias looked her over. "Girl's got a reputation." Junie didn't blink. "You hear it from the man who couldn't keep his pants up or the woman who married him out of shame." Elias raised a brow. "She's got spirit," he said. "She's got a shovel," Clay replied. Elias turned back toward him. "Folks say she's trouble. Say she put a knife in a man's arm for getting too close." "I did," Junie said flatly. He thought no was a joke. Elias laughed, slow and dark. I like her. I don't care, Clay said. Elias tipped his hat, stepped back onto the wagon, and gave the reins a flick. Watch yourself, Morgan. Trouble draws fire. When the dust cleared, Junie turned to Clay. Friend of yours? Used to be. Still is? No, they didn't talk about it again. That evening, Clay left the barn door open a little longer. Junie stayed out with the horses till moonrise, brushing the spotted mare until her coat gleamed in the lantern light. When she finally came inside, Clay was sitting on the porch, a bottle at his side, not drinking. You ever run? He asked. Plenty. You done? She looked at the stars, then at the land. I think so. Clay stood and walked inside, left the door open behind him. She followed 10 minutes later, and slept. For the first time in weeks. Not because it was safe, but because she had a reason to stay. The bunkhouse door creaked open just past dawn, but Junie was already up. Had been for hours. She'd barely slept, listening instead to the dry groan of the wind pressing against the walls, the moan of the old wood stretching in the heat. Clay hadn't lied. The place was dead quiet. No crickets, no birds, not even a damned rooster. Only silence, and the occasional sharp clack of something shifting in the barn or the windmill's rusted cry. She dressed quick. Her clothes stank of travel and mule sweat, but there weren't spares, not yet, and the old water pump by the shed wasn't kind to dirt or skin. Still, she scrubbed her arms and face with cold water until the tan line disappeared beneath fresh, raw pink. Her reflection in the water trough looked back at her like a ghost. Sharp cheekbones, eyes like burnt match tips, lips that barely smiled unless they meant it. That suited her fine. By the time Clay came out of the main house, she was already leading the mule out of the stall, brushing it down, not because she liked the beast, but because it was routine. Routine kept you sane, kept you from thinking too long about the years you lost. He didn't speak right away, just watched her with that same narrowed look he'd worn the day before. Junie figured that was just his face. A man who didn't trust anything he hadn't built himself. You don't sleep in? He said finally. I'm not some merchant wife, she replied, not looking up. Clay scratched the back of his neck. You hungry? No. You'll work harder if you eat. I'll work harder if you don't talk so much. That earned a grunt. Maybe even the ghost of a smile. Clay nodded toward the paddock. Fencing split along the north line. Took a beating in the last windstorm. Needs fixing. I'll find it. Got tools in the shed. You know your way around wire. I know how not to bleed to death on it. Good enough. She grabbed the coil, gloves, and the hammer, threw them in an old canvas bag, and marched off without asking where north was. Clay watched her go, arms swinging like she was walking toward a fight. By noon, the heat rose like a fist from the dirt. It punched through boots and collars, soaked hair through hats. Clay spent the morning repairing the pump line near the cattle trough, his hands black with grease and pipe rust. When he finally wiped his forehead and looked around, Junie was still nowhere to be seen. He rode out on a mule to find her. She was half a mile north, sleeves rolled to her shoulders, legs braced as she yanked a strand of barbed wire taut between two split posts. Her hands bled from under the gloves. Her forehead was slick with sweat, her jaw clenched as she pounded the nail into the beam like it had insulted her personally. Clay dismounted and leaned against a nearby fence post. She didn't stop. You're going to ruin your hands, he said. They were already ruined, she shot back, driving the nail through, twisting the wire tight. What's one more scar? Clay looked down at her work. It was rough, but solid. Strong. Most ranch hands he'd hired would have left a sag in the middle or bent the nail clean through the beam. Junie didn't half-ass anything. She didn't seem to know how. You don't take shortcuts, he said. Shortcuts kill animals. He nodded. You eat yet? She paused, shrugged. Had a chunk of bread. That was yesterday. Then I'm fasting. I got beans on the stove. Congratulations. He pushed off the post and walked back to his mule. "You're welcome to keep working till you pass out, but you won't impress me." Junie finally looked up. "Good, I ain't trying to." He didn't reply. Just climbed up and rode back to the house, leaving her to her silence and her bleeding palms. That night, she came to the porch just after sundown. Clay was sitting with his boots on the railing, watching the sun melt into the dry hills. A single lantern burned behind him, its light flickering against the screen door. She didn't knock, just stood at the bottom step. "You still got those beans?" He tilted his head. "Might. You still got that mouth?" Unfortunately, Junie climbed the steps and sat on the porch floor like a dog settling into familiar dirt. Clay went inside, returned with a tin plate and spoon. He didn't say anything as he handed it to her, but she saw the extra chunk of cornbread on the edge of the dish. Her hands trembled as she took it. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect her to. For a while, they ate in silence. The only sound was the clink of metal on tin and the slow, dragging wind as it moved over the hills like an old man's breath. "You ever work stock?" Clay asked after a while. "I've worked everything that breathes," she said. "Cattle, horses, pigs, snakes." "Snakes!" "Met a preacher once, called me cursed, said the devil kept girls like me in his shirt pocket." Clay snorted. "Was he wrong?" "Damn right he was. I'd bite a man long before I served one." He nodded slowly. "Good policy." She looked out into the dark. The fields stretched endless, broken only by the black bones of dying trees. "Why'd you buy me?" she asked, voice quiet now. "I needed help." "Not what I asked." He leaned forward, arms resting on his knees. "Because no one else did." She glanced at him, eyes narrowing. "That's not a reason." "It is to me." Junie finished her food, wiped the spoon clean with her tongue and handed it back. "I ain't staying forever," she said. "Don't get cozy." "I wouldn't know how," Clay replied. She stood, stretched her back until it popped, then walked off into the dark. Clay sat there a while longer, wondering what the hell kind of fire he'd brought into his yard. Then, again, maybe that's what the land needed. Fire to clear the rot. By the third day, Junie had already mapped the property better than most hands who stayed for months. She knew where the dry stream beds bent, where the fence sagged worst, where the crows nested and the coyotes hunted. She didn't ride the mule. She walked. Always. Even in the sun. Clay watched her from a distance. She moved like something born wild, with quick feet and sharp eyes, and never once looked surprised by anything she found. That afternoon she was in the corral with a nervous paint mare that had thrown every man who tried to saddle her. Junie stood still in the center, a rope in her hand, watching the mare circle her like a wary dog. No whip. No shouts, just presence. Clay leaned on the fence rail, arms crossed. "She'll kick you clear to Kansas if you get close," he called. Junie didn't blink. "Only if I give her a reason. Had a man try last month. Got his ribs broken. Sounds like he had it coming." The mare stopped, ears flicking. Junie lowered her eyes, then turned her back to the animal and stood still. Clay frowned. "What are you doing?" "Letting her choose. She's a horse, not a dance partner. She's a soul. You just don't see it." The mare took a step forward. Then another. Junie waited. When the horse's nose finally brushed her shoulder, she raised her hand slowly, gently, like lifting a curtain. She touched the mare's cheek, whispered something too soft for Clay to hear. He stood in stunned silence. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. Junie turned to him. "From the only thing that ever loved me and didn't ask for anything back." Clay didn't ask what. He didn't need to. That night, he didn't offer beans. Junie was already at the table before he could light the lamp. They didn't speak much. Didn't need to. Each day passed the same. Hard work, few words, and a growing rhythm that neither of them wanted to name. But it was there. In the way, Junie left a strip of jerky on the porch rail when she knew Clay skipped lunch. In the way, he mended her boot with a new sole without saying a word. In the way, she stayed outside till dusk, walking the line, checking for broken posts, counting shadows. 3 weeks in, the general store sent a letter with the mailboy. Clay opened it at the table, brows furrowing. "You been going into town?" he asked. Junie kept her eyes on the beans. "No." "This letter says you owe $5 in damages for a broken window," she smirked. "Then their window shouldn't have gotten in my way. What'd you throw?" "A man." Clay set the letter down. "Want to tell me why?" Junie leaned back. "He touched me." Clay's eyes didn't blink. "Did you break his jaw?" "No, just his pride." He nodded once. "You hungry?" "I could eat." They ate without talking further. Later, after she'd gone back to the bunkhouse, Clay sat on the porch, staring at the stars. The night was wide and black and silent. He didn't know what Junie Rollins really was, but he was starting to believe he might need her more than the land itself. The storm didn't start in the sky. It started in the horses. It was Junie who felt it first, walking the southern ridge with the fencing looped over her shoulder. She'd just hammered in the last spike when the wind changed. Not a big change, just a sharp twist like a breath held too long. The hairs on her arms prickled. In the valley below, the horses had stopped grazing. All of them, heads up, nostrils flaring. She knew that kind of stillness. She'd seen it before. Once, years back, when her pause wagon had pulled too close to a dry canyon and the land had held its breath before a flash flood came roaring out of the blue. She dropped the hammer and ran. The corral was nearly a mile off, and she ran the whole way, boots pounding dust, arms pumping like piston rods. She didn't stop until she cleared the last fence post and skidded to a halt in the yard where Clay stood beside the feed shed, holding a shovel. "Wind's wrong," she panted. "Animals feel it." He looked up, blinked once. "Storm?" She nodded. "Soon." Clay glanced at the sky. "Looks clear." "It ain't." He didn't argue. Clay had spent enough time on the land to know that the sky wasn't always honest. Together they moved fast, drawing the horses in from the east pen, locking the latches, checking the roof of the barn where the wind had tried to tear loose a plank last season. Junie climbed to the top like a raccoon and nailed it down without being asked. By the time the first thunderhead rolled over the ridge, they had everything locked down. Then the rain came. Not steady, not calm, furious, like fists pounding the earth. The barn trembled. Lightning stabbed at the hills. Clay and Junie crouched near the lower stall with the youngest foal, shielding it from the panic of the others. The mare kicked and thrashed, but Junie stood still, her hand on its neck, whispering. Not soothing. Commanding. Clay could barely hear her over the wind, but the tone was clear. She was holding the storm back with her bare voice. Somehow, it listened. When it passed, hours later, they were soaked through, covered in hay and dust, backs aching, knees raw. But no animals were lost. Clay didn't say thank you. He just handed her a towel and poured 2 tin cups of water from the canister on the wall. Junie drank like it was whiskey, wiped her mouth on her sleeve, looked at the stalls one by one, counting the horses in her head. "You name them?" she asked. "No," Clay said. "Didn't seem right. Don't name things you might lose." "They don't care about names." He glanced at her. "You do?" She stared at a chestnut mare with a jagged blaze across her forehead. "I care about being seen," Clay nodded, slow and silent. That night, as Clay settled into the single chair on the porch and lit the stub of a cigarette, Junie wandered barefoot across the yard, sleeves rolled up, face pale in the moonlight. "Your hand's still bleeding?" he asked. "No." "Blisters'll set in tomorrow." "They always do." He took a long drag, then gestured toward the chair. She didn't sit, just leaned against the post beside him. "You ride?" he asked. Junie looked at him like he'd asked if she breathed. "I was born in a saddle," she said. "Stayed there until someone knocked me off." "Thought as much." She shifted her weight, cracking her knuckles. "Why don't you ask what you really want to know?" "What's that?" "Why I got thrown out of every house from here to Mason Hollow." Clay didn't answer. Didn't need to. The question hung between them like the last curl of smoke from his cigarette. She closed her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "My pa was a bastard. Mean as a kicked dog. Used to keep his belt on the wall just so I could see it while I ate. Said it made me chew slower." Clay didn't move. "Worked cattle since I was 8. Learned fast. Kept quiet. But when he died, nobody wanted a girl that knew more about bridles than bread dough. House after house. Men saw me as a pair of hands or a pair of hips. Sometimes both. One tried. He lost a tooth. I lost a job." "You kill anyone?" Clay asked. She opened one eye. "Not yet," he nodded. "Then we're fine." Junie tilted her head, watching him. "You're not like the others. I'm too tired to be anything." "Good. I don't need saving." He crushed the cigarette under his boot. "Neither do I." For a long while they didn't speak, just listened to the barn creak and the horses snort in their sleep. "You ever lose anyone?" Junie asked. Clay nodded. "My old man." "Miss him?" "Sometimes. Mostly I miss what the ranch looked like when he was alive. It was clean then. Honest. Now it's all rust and debt." Junie looked down at her boots. "You ever wish you could burn it all down and start fresh?" Clay turned to look at her. "No fire's only good if you got seeds to plant after." She smiled. It was a small thing, barely there, but it cracked through the dirt of her face like water finding root. "Guess I'm your first seed then," she said. Clay snorted. "More like a weed." "Better than a ghost." They stood together until the moon reached its highest point, then drifted apart without saying goodnight. The next morning, Junie was up before sunrise. She saddled the chestnut mare without asking, adjusted the stirrups, and rode out past the ridge. Clay watched her from the porch, arms crossed, the smell of fresh coffee curling up like hope. She was gone 2 hours. When she came back, she rode like a storm. The mare was slick with sweat, but her gait was even, hooves steady. Junie dismounted with ease, her face flushed, hair wild, eyes brighter than Clay had ever seen them. "I marked the creek trail," she said. "Cut a new route through the dry patch. There's still water in the canyon. Not much, but enough." Clay nodded. "Show me." They rode out together, the silence between them comfortable now. Along the way, Junie pointed out animal tracks, new coyote dens, broken fence lines that Clay hadn't seen in years. She didn't just observe. She understood. When they reached the canyon, Clay dismounted, crouched beside the shallow pool that shimmered in the shade. He dipped a finger in, tasted it. "Still clean," he said. "Told you." He looked at her. "You see everything." "I have to." "Why?" Junie looked away. "Because if I don't, someone dies." Clay stared at her, unsure what to say. In the end, he just stood, brushed dust from his knee, and turned toward the horses. "You're not like anyone I've known," he said. She smiled without warmth. "That's what they all said, right before they slammed the door." Clay didn't slam doors, he just kept them locked. But for some reason, that morning he left his open. Later that night, after a long day repairing the roof of the hay shed, Junie found him sitting beside the barn, watching the stars. She didn't speak, just sat down next to him, knees pulled to her chest. "Why horses?" Clay asked. She blinked. "What do you mean?" "You're good with them. Like, too good. They follow you like you speak their language." Junie shrugged. "Maybe I do." He waited. She sighed. "My ma was Apache, left before I could remember her. But Pa said she could calm a mountain lion with a whisper. Said she ran wild in the hills with her hair down and bare feet. You believe that?" "I have to." Clay nodded. "Fair. Junie leaned her head back. When I was small, I used to crawl under the stalls, lay there with the animals when Pa was drunk. They protected me. I never told anyone that before. I won't tell. I know. They sat together a long time, not speaking, until the sky turned violet and the world fell quiet again. Junie didn't know how long she'd stay, but she no longer wanted to leave. Not yet. The days had settled into a rhythm, but rhythm wasn't peace. It was just order before the fall. Junie could feel it like a hum beneath her boots. Something about the wind, the way the crows started gathering early in the day, wings stretched over broken fence lines. The animals sensed it too, their skittish glances and tighter circles in the pen. The chestnut mare, once relaxed under her hand, now shied at sudden movements. The foal she'd nursed with a dropper wouldn't eat unless Clay stood nearby. Trouble, she thought. Not from the sky this time, not from weather or sickness or beasts. No, this was man trouble. It started with a rider. Junie was fixing the gate hinge near the west pasture when she heard the clop of hooves over hard-packed dirt. She stood, squinting toward the horizon, hammer still in her hand. A single rider, brown hat, stiff spine, pale gray horse, moving like it had something to prove. Clay stepped out of the barn at the same time she did. The rider didn't slow. When he reached the gate, he reined the horse with a sharp tug and dismounted in a single dusty motion. "Tom Weber," Clay said without a smile. "You look uglier than I remember." Tom spat in the dirt and tugged off his gloves. "You still hiding out here, Clay? Thought you'd have sold this patch of weeds and gone east by now." Clay crossed his arms. "Some of us know how to work with dirt." Tom's eyes flicked toward Junie and stayed there. "Heard you picked up a new ranch hand." Junie stared right back. "You looking to hire in my place? 'Cause you'll be cheap." He laughed, dry and mean. "Heard she was trouble." "She's better than you ever were," Clay said flatly. Tom stepped forward, close enough that Junie smelled the chew on his breath. "Some folks in town been talking. Said your new little helper's got a sticky hand." Junie's fingers twitched near the hammer. Clay didn't move. "Sticky how?" Clay asked. Tom's grin widened. "Old man Briggs's prize stallion disappeared 2 nights ago, broke through a locked gate. Hoof prints went southeast before the trail vanished." "We're northwest," Junie said. "You need a map?" Tom ignored her. "Funny thing is, Briggs says someone was asking about that stallion a few days before. A girl. Said she looked wild. Red hair. Wore her mouth like a man." Junie didn't flinch. "I've never spoken to Briggs in my life." Tom turned to Clay. "You really trust her? After all the stories?" Clay stepped down from the porch and walked until he stood toe-to-toe with the man. "You come here to talk or accuse?" "I come here to warn. If that horse don't show up soon, you'll find more than rumors following your little stray. You know how folks are. I know how you are." Tom leaned back, slow and easy, like he wasn't in the mood to finish a fight. "Well, if you do happen to stumble across a lost stallion, make sure to tell her not to ride him through town like she owns the place. Wouldn't go down well." With that, he mounted again, turned his horse, and galloped off without a goodbye. Junie stood there, teeth clenched so tight her jaw ached. "I didn't touch his damn horse," Clay nodded. "I know. You believe me." "I wouldn't have said it if I didn't." She looked at him like he might vanish any second. "But you thought about it." "No," he said softly. "I didn't." That night, she didn't eat. The bunkhouse window stayed dark. By the time Clay rose the next morning, Junie was already gone. The chestnut mare was missing too. He found her note wedged under a coffee tin on the porch. "I didn't do it, but I'm going to find out who did. Don't follow me. If I don't come back, at least you'll know I didn't lie." Clay stared at the note for a long time before folding it into his pocket. He didn't call for her, didn't chase her, but he fed the animals with quiet fury, each chore done with more force than necessary, every tool slammed into place like punctuation. By midday, the wind picked up again. Not the kind that brought rain. This wind smelled of grit and wood smoke. It scraped against the tin roof like claws. The crows were back too, perching in rows like black judges. Junie had taken no food, no rifle, just her knife and a saddlebag. Clay loaded his own rifle. He didn't saddle the mule. He took the old gray mare his father had trained years back, the one that didn't like strangers but still responded to a silent pull on the reins. He didn't tell the animals where he was going. He didn't know yet, but he followed the hoof prints into the ridge path and didn't look back. Junie wasn't stupid, that much he knew, but she was fire. And fire didn't think ahead. It burned, it leapt, it ran straight into the dark. She rode fast and hard through the night. The canyon she aimed for was half a day out, between Briggs's land and the old mining trail, where rustlers used to camp before the war chased them out. She knew the shortcuts. She'd been through the basin once before, a lifetime ago, when she was still riding under her father's name. Now, no name protected her. She reached the base of the ridge near sundown, just as the light turned blood orange across the rocks. The stallion tracks were faint, but present, deeper than a wild gallop would make. Steady, rider-heavy, moving east, which meant someone had taken the animal, someone familiar with the trail. She kept riding. 2 hours later, she found smoke. Not the wide, curled smoke of a campfire, but the smudged, choking kind. Brush fire. She dismounted, led the mare to a shallow creek, and climbed the ridge on foot. From the top, she saw it, a flicker of orange behind the trees. Then a crack, then a boom. Fire. It wasn't big yet, but it would be. And there, just at the edge of the flame, was the stallion, tied, saddled, abandoned. Junie didn't hesitate. She ran downhill so fast, the brush sliced her jeans. Her boots slipped on loose shale, and still she kept going. When she reached the animal, its eyes rolled white, its breath coming in hard gulps. She cut the rope with a single slash of her knife. "Easy, easy," she whispered. "You're not the one who deserves to burn." She climbed into the saddle, turned the horse toward the creek, and kicked hard. The fire caught behind her. Embers flew like wasps, landing in her hair, her clothes. The stallion screamed but ran, through smoke, through heat, through trees that hissed and split from the inside. Clay saw the smoke from the far trail and spurred the mare harder than he should have. His legs burned, his arms shook. But he didn't stop. He saw the blur of a horse cutting through the smoke line and rode toward it. When they met in the open clearing, Junie was coughing so hard she couldn't speak. He caught her before she fell. Together they led the stallion and mare into the creek and waited there, thigh-deep in cold water as the fire raged behind them. Junie didn't cry, but when the heat had passed and her breath finally returned, she whispered one word. "Framed." Clay didn't ask how, didn't need to. He held her as she shook. Not like a father, not like a lover, like something else entirely. Like one storm holding another in the quiet, after the burn. They walked the horses back under moonlight. The stallion limped, but he followed. When they reached the ranch at dawn, Junie collapsed onto the porch steps. Clay stood over her, hands on his hips. "You disobeyed me," he said. "Good," she rasped. "I'd hate to be predictable." He knelt beside her. "You could have died." She looked up. "So could you." They stared at each other, two fools too stubborn to quit. Then she laughed, harsh, cracked, alive. He joined her. The stallion whinnied in the yard, and the wind carried the sound far across the hills. Whatever was coming next, it would find them together, and neither would stand alone again. The ranch looked different under smoke. Not the smoke of fire that had passed, but a thinner kind. The kind that hung after a storm of men, after suspicion and fear had made their home between fences and footsteps. It was the silence that changed most. The way the wind came through without echo, the way even the horses no longer whinnied and less called. Junie stood at the paddock gate, one hand resting on the stallion's neck, watching the road for riders who hadn't come but would. She knew it. Clay was inside, sharpening his old hunting knife. Not because he needed it sharp, but because it was something to do. something to keep his hands from curling into fists. Tom Weber had spread word in town that the stallion had been found, yes, but with smoke in his voice, like maybe Clay and the girl had something to hide after all. No one believed Tom, not outright. But no one trusted Clay either. And Junie? Junie was the flame they all blamed when the grass turned black. Clay set the blade down, stood, and stared out the window. Junie hadn't come in since breakfast. The plate he'd left for her still sat on the table, untouched. She didn't say much anymore. Not since the fire. Not since he'd held her in the creek with her shoulders shaking like she was trying not to break apart. That moment had done something to them both. Not softened them. God, no, but pulled them tight in a way words couldn't explain. Like two links of chain forged in the same fire. He walked out onto the porch. Junie didn't look back. "Trouble coming," she said. Clay followed her gaze. 3 riders on the ridge. Not town folk, not bankers, Briggs and his men. The stallion shifted under her hand. Junie soothed it, whispered something into its ear, and the beast calmed, like it had been waiting for her voice to remember where it was. Clay stepped down into the yard, his boots slow but steady. Briggs didn't dismount when he reached the gate. He was lean, mean, and wore his coat like it was stitched from stolen hides. The 2 behind him were younger, sunburnt and nervous. "Well," Briggs said, "ain't this a pretty picture?" Clay didn't answer. "You got something of mine," Briggs said. Clay tilted his head. "If you mean the stallion you lost, he was tied up near the ridge, abandoned. Junie brought him back. I didn't ask her to. She didn't need your permission to clean up your mess." Briggs chuckled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You think you can keep him?" Clay raised a brow. "I think he's standing on my land. And you never paid a bounty for finding him." Briggs stepped off his horse, slow and easy, like a man used to getting his way. His hand hovered near the gun on his hip, not drawing, but reminding. Clay didn't move. "You know what I think?" Briggs said. "I think that girl of yours took him. Rode him for miles, burned the damn trees down trying to cover her tracks, and now you're playing sheriff in a county with no law." Junie stepped forward. "You think I stole your horse?" she said, her voice calm. "You tie him up in fire country, ride off without a trace, and then blame the girl you already tried to smear? Try harder." Briggs looked her up and down. "You talk like a man. I bite like one too." The 2 behind Briggs shifted in their saddles. Clay could feel it, the thin thread of fear winding up tight, waiting to snap. "You think I'd burn a trail for a stolen horse?" Junie said. "You think I'd risk my life in that canyon for something that ain't mine?" "I think you like playing the hero," Briggs sneered. "Makes folks forget the outlaw underneath." Clay stepped between them. "You done?" Briggs smiled. "Not quite." He reached into his coat and tossed a rolled-up parchment toward Clay. It landed in the dirt with a soft thud. Clay picked it up, unrolled it. A warrant. Not real, not official, but something printed up in the town press, signed by the deputy. A formal accusation. "Stealing livestock," Briggs said. "Assault, trespass." "She didn't steal anything," Clay said. "She's a danger," Briggs replied, "and you're hiding her." Junie's fists clenched at her sides. Her jaw worked like she wanted to spit. Clay stepped forward again, slowly. "You want her?" he said. "You come through me." Briggs smiled, drew his gun. Not fast, not aggressive, just enough to show it, to let the sun gleam off the barrel like a threat. Clay didn't flinch. Neither did Junie. The silence stretched like a rope pulled taut. Then one of the younger riders coughed. Briggs held Clay's gaze a second longer, then holstered the gun. "We'll be back," he said, "with law." "You'll need better lies," Junie said. Briggs turned without a word and rode off, the others following. Clay watched them until the dust settled. Then he turned to her. "You all right?" "I'm fine." "Don't lie." She turned away, fists still clenched. "I've been run off before. This one just feels colder." He walked to her, stopped close enough for her to feel his breath. "We stand," he said. "No one pushes you off this land." She looked up at him. "No one?" "No one." The next day, Clay rode into town, not for supplies, not for mail, for truth. He walked straight into the deputy's office and threw the warrant onto the desk. "You signed this?" he asked. The deputy looked up, startled. "What?" Briggs. He brought." "Did you sign it?" The man swallowed. "He said the girl was trouble." Clay leaned in, voice low. "I asked if you signed it." The deputy nodded. Clay turned, left, and didn't look back. By the time he returned to the ranch, Junie was waiting on the fence, her face unreadable. "You went into town?" "Yeah." "And?" He reached into his coat, pulled the torn paper from his pocket, and tossed it into the trough. "It won't stick?" She didn't smile, just nodded. But that night, after dinner, she poured 2 tin cups of water and sat beside him on the porch. "I don't run anymore," she said. "You don't have to. They'll come." "I know." She sipped her water. "Then we prepare." The next few days were a blur of motion. They reinforced the barn, moved the horses to the northern paddock, set lanterns along the ridge, sharpened tools, checked locks. Every step, every moment, shared. Junie trained the stallion, taught it to follow voice instead of reins. Clay repaired the shotgun that hadn't fired since his father passed. At night, they sat under stars and said nothing, but everything passed between them anyway. On the 5th night, the fire returned, not from the sky, from men. Briggs came with 5 riders, torches in hand. They reached the fence line just after dusk. Clay was waiting. Junie stood behind him, her knife strapped tight, the stallion at her back. Briggs called out, "Last chance." Clay stepped forward. "Turn around." Briggs laughed. "She ain't worth it." Junie's voice rang clear. "No, I'm not. I'm more." The riders moved. So did Clay. It didn't become a shootout. It didn't become a battle. Because the horses wouldn't move past Junie. They stopped, stamped, shook their heads. The lead rider cursed, tried to force his steed forward, but the beast reared. Junie stepped up, hand raised. "Go," she said. The stallion screamed. The others followed. Briggs was left alone. Clay raised his rifle, not to shoot, but to point. Briggs turned and fled. It ended with hooves in the night, and the smell of sweat and fear. Junie stood in the dust. Clay lowered the gun. "You didn't fight," she said. "You didn't let me." The porch light glowed behind them. Home, not a place, a choice. Junie walked up the steps, slow and sure. Clay followed. And for the first time in either of their lives, no one chased them. The winter came soft that year. No harsh winds or angry skies, just a slow curling of breath in the morning and a hush that wrapped the hills like a wool blanket. The ground froze 1 layer deep, enough to bite boots but not break them. Clay liked it that way. The cold reminded him he still felt things. He wasn't sure when exactly the ache in his bones had stopped, meaning something was wrong, and started meaning something had been earned. Junie, for her part, hated it. She hated the way her fingers went stiff even inside gloves, hated how every bucket of water turned to ice by dawn, hated the smell of smoke in her clothes. But she never complained. She simply moved faster, started firewood earlier, shoveled out the stalls with her collar pulled up and her scarf over her mouth like an outlaw heading for a robbery. She had a way of becoming part of the landscape without ever blending into it. Even when the snow dusted the hills and everything turned white and dead and quiet, she was a live ember, something moving against the still. Clay found himself watching her more often than he meant to, not out of worry anymore. That time had passed. It was something else now, a kind of respect that came with no rules, like watching a thundercloud build and knowing it wouldn't strike, but it could if it wanted. He didn't call her daughter. She didn't call him father. But the silence between them had turned warm. Word got out, slowly, that the Morgan place was hiring. Folks started sending letters. A few drifters wrote in, tried their hand. Some stayed. Some didn't. Clay let Junie decide who stayed. She had an eye for people the way she did horses, said she could tell what a man wanted, just by the way he held a shovel. If his hands curled too tight or not enough, he was looking for something other than work. By spring, the ranch had hands again. Not many. Enough. They rebuilt the south barn, painted the house for the first time in years. A woman from town brought them a sourdough starter and asked if Junie wanted to sell bread at the market. Junie said no, but she taught the woman how to saddle her first horse, and in return, the woman left a pie on the porch every week without a note. No one dared call it charity. Junie took the stallion out every morning just after dawn. The sound of hooves was the new alarm clock. Sometimes Clay rode with her. Most times he didn't. She rode far, into the creeks and over the ridges, mapping new trails, checking traps, talking to the sky when she thought no one listened. One morning, she didn't return by noon. Clay waited. By 3, he saddled up. He found her near the east bluff, sitting in the grass with her boots off and her feet in the stream. The stallion grazed nearby, unhitched, but still close. She didn't turn when he approached. "Got worried," Clay said. "You always get worried?" "Only when I've got something to lose." She glanced up at him. "You got something to lose?" He nodded. "I do now." Junie pulled her feet from the water, dried them on the hem of her shirt. "I saw my reflection in the water," she said. "Didn't recognize it." "That bad?" "No. Just not who I was." Clay dismounted, crouched beside her. "You're not who you were," he said. "Neither am I." She watched the stallion flick his tail and snort at a fly. "You ever wonder if you'll wake up and it'll all be gone? The land, the quiet, the peace?" He nodded. "Every day. And what do?" He stood. "I saddle up anyway." She smiled then. Not a big one, but it had weight. A week later, the schoolhouse teacher came calling. Said she'd heard Junie was good with animals. Asked if she'd teach a few of the town kids how to ride. Junie said no at first. Said she didn't teach, didn't have the voice for it. But the next week, when 2 small girls wandered up the path asking if this was the place with the wild horse lady, she didn't turn them away. She taught them how to lead a colt, how to speak low, how to breathe near an animal without spooking it. She didn't raise her voice, didn't smile much. But the girls kept coming back. More kids followed. Within a month, Saturdays became lesson day. Clay built a hitching rail near the corral and repaired all the extra saddles they'd stored in the loft. He never once called it a riding school, but he made a sign anyway. It said, "Watch, listen, ride. No names, no titles, just 3 rules." The townsfolk started visiting again. Not in crowds, in 2s and 3s. They'd watch Junie from a distance, wait to see if she'd bite. Some brought their horses for her to look at. Some brought broken tack or questions they didn't trust anyone else to answer. She answered. Clay watched it all unfold without comment. He never told her how proud he was. But he oiled her saddle every week and left her favorite canned peaches on the pantry shelf without saying a word. One afternoon, just as the heat was starting to settle in and the flies got mean, a little girl with yellow ribbons in her hair tugged at Junie's sleeve. "Are you Mr. Clay's daughter?" she asked. Junie blinked. The other children went quiet. Clay was across the yard, hammering a post into place. Junie looked at him. He looked back. She didn't answer the girl, but she said, "Go help Mr. Clay with that fence." The girl ran off. Junie wiped her hands on her jeans, walked over, and leaned on the rail next to him. "She asked if I was your daughter." Clay nodded. "What'd you say?" "Nothing." He hammered once more. "That's fair?" She watched him for a long while, then said, "What if I was?" He didn't pause, didn't blink. Then I'd have done something right after all. She swallowed hard, turned her face to the wind. "You ever gonna marry again?" she asked suddenly. He snorted. "At my age, you're not dead." "No, but I'd rather fight another fire than court some woman who wants to change my boots and make me shave." Junie laughed, loud, open, unguarded. "I like your boots," she said. "Thanks." She turned serious again. "You happy?" Clay looked at the house. "The barn, the hills." "You made it easy to be," he said. She nodded. That night, she didn't sleep in the study. She slept on the couch by the fire, boots off, arms folded, the soft sound of horses breathing just outside the window. In the morning, Clay found a note on the table. "Gone to ride the creek trail. Left breakfast on the stove." It wasn't signed. Didn't need to be. He sat down, ate eggs that were a little too salty, drank coffee that had been boiled down to mud, and felt more at home than he ever had. The wind came in through the window, warm, clean, and full of life. And so, the wild girl who once stood alone with fists clenched and eyes burning found her place not by being tamed, but by being seen. And the rancher who thought he'd lost everything rediscovered what it meant to build something worth keeping, one fence post, one breath, one morning at a time. Together, they didn't just survive the West, they claimed it. Not with power or pride, but with quiet loyalty and the kind of love that rides beside you, never behind, never ahead. If this story stirred something in you, if you felt the dust, the fire, and the heart behind every hoofbeat, then saddle up and hit that subscribe button to join us here on Wild West Love Chronicles. Don't miss the next ride into another untamed tale of grit, heart, and unforgettable bonds. There's more waiting just over the next ridge.